So thank you all for joining me. I'm so excited to be here today with three wonderful guests. We're going to have a conversation about happiness at Harvard and happiness post Harvard. And just to give a little context of why I started my happiness journey, and then I'll have each person share a little bit before we launch into some questions, is 8 years ago, I became a student of Tal, and he didn't even know it. So I was facing a big life change. My son was about to enter college, and I was going to become an empty nester. And I was a single mom, and my work revolved around basically two things: running my business and being a mom. And I thought I'd be thrown into despondency or depression as a result of becoming empty nester, because I have a genetic predisposition to have that lower baseline. And so I thought, okay, what can I do? What can I do? And I discovered Tal Ben-Shahar, who's with us here today. And he created, and he can share more, the most popular course ever at Harvard that Tim McLoughlin, who's with us here, and Adriana Cosgriff, that she also took. And they took it at different times, and they can share with you their experiences. So I watched all 22 lectures online because they were available online. But they were courses from a long time ago, and it really changed my thinking and started to change my life. And so Tal didn't know it, but he was the critical start of my happiness journey 8 years ago. And then over the years, I had a chance to take a lot of coursework from another company that he co-founded called Whole Being Institute. And I got my I did coaching coursework there and other coursework. And then most recently, in the last year plus, I've had the opportunity to be a student along with other journeyers throughout the world in his Happiness Studies Academy. And Tal, I'm so excited to be earning my diploma, my certificate, just in a few weeks in Cartagena, Colombia. You'll be giving me my certificate, and we'll get to celebrate together in person. So I'm very, very excited. It's been an incredible experience. I've learned so much, so much that I'm applying every day and look forward to applying for the rest of my life, basically. So that's my backstory. So to talk a little bit about the other two students here with us today, I've known Tim, for a long, long time,
Yeah,
for many, many years here in the Triangle, because Tim is kind of this guy that everyone knows, and he can share more about his story. But sort of the root of my career here in the Triangle has been in the entrepreneurial community. I served on the leadership teams of several startups, and Tim is the guy to go to if you're thinking about starting a company, and he can share more. And the last time we got together a few months ago, I had this revelation and realization, even though I've known him for so long, that he was a psych major at Harvard, and found out that he was also a student of Tal's. So that was another connection that we had beyond
that's
the ones
right.
that we had.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and then Adriana, I've gotten to know just more recently, just I think this year, through our service on the Harvard Alumni Association board here in the Triangle, where the three of us live. And we got together for lunch, and I realized she was a psych major too. And then quickly we realized that we had Tal in common. So, and then I kind of connected the dots recently and thought it'd be fun to get all of us together. So maybe if you two wouldn't mind telling a little bit more about what you currently do, and then we can move on to our Harvard happiness experience.
Adriana, you want me to kick it off? All right. So thanks for that, Grace. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion. I'm very happy to be here. So Tim McLoughlin, I'm currently father of two. I got 6 and 3-year-old boys. Married to a woman that I met in first grade here in Raleigh, North Carolina. So that's a little bit about the personal life. Professionally, I'm the managing partner at Co-Founders Capital. We are a venture capital fund focused on investing in early stage software companies. So at the very earliest stages. So pre-revenue, just at revenue. We just recently raised our third fund, which is a $50 million fund. And so we work very closely with entrepreneurs in the community to help them, give them the capital they need and grow and scale their business. So that's what we're doing. And that's how I got to meet Grace, through that.
Well, clearly you and I have to hang out, Tim, because I also have two boys, ages 8 and 4. So that's for later. I'm Adriana Cosgriff. So I am an attorney and I have my own small consulting firm that works with nonprofits, mostly on strategy and other kinds of capacity building to help them work better, because that is my passion, which, by the way, I realized when I sat in Tal classes years ago during his first few iterations of his positive psychology and leadership training class. So it's a real privilege to be here today. Thank you for inviting me, Grace. And it's really wonderful to be sitting next to you too, Tim and Tal.
Oh, and just one thing that's interesting is I started my studies with Tal 8 years ago for purely personal reasons, as I mentioned. But then I quickly realized that all this content could really help my coaching clients. So, and then when I took the coursework at Whole Being Institute, and then now it's for life. So, so I run a coaching and consulting firm and coach leaders throughout the world, and they often will get assignments from me fitting their particular situation, as I write a weekly column on happiness and leadership. And I talk about Tal all the time and what he teaches us. So those of you who read that have kind of heard some of little bits of Tal's wisdom, but we're fortunate enough today to hear a lot more. So, so maybe first, well, maybe Tal, if you want to say a few things, but certainly you can say a lot more as we go
Well,
along.
just a couple of things. First of all, my cup is overflowing with gratitude. So thank you for organizing this, Grace. So amazing to see you, Adriana and Tim. And it's amazing how memory works. I mean, I was literally just seeing your faces. I was transported to that, first year when I taught it, Adriana, when you were a student, and then a couple of years later, Tim, when you were a student. So this is really amazing, very moving for me. Thank you for putting this together.
Yeah, it's special for us too. Yeah. So maybe if we could step back many years, you guys are all psych majors at Harvard. And I'm gonna guess maybe you have different reasons for choosing that path, but maybe if you could share a little bit with our viewers, how you decide to major in that and how it helped you as a person.
Mm.
Tal, do you want to start?
Sure. So I'll start. I actually came into Harvard as a computer science major or concentrator. And, my father is an engineer. My mother is a microbiologist. The first book that I actually read cover to cover, as opposed to Cliff Notes, please don't tell my lit teacher this, was when long after I graduated from high school. So I was never interested in the humanities. I did it because I had to, or the social sciences for that matter. And then I came to Harvard, studying computer science, found myself my sophomore year doing well academically. I was also on the varsity squash team, so doing well in squash. Socially, things were fine, and yet I was very unhappy. And I came to Harvard as an older undergraduate because I served in the Israeli military for 3 years before. And when I was unhappy in the military, I had a good excuse. You're usually not supposed to be happy in the military, but I came to Harvard, amazing place, beautiful, amazing people, great, faculty, and I'm unhappy. And that's when I realized, something which was in hindsight maybe trivial, but wasn't at all trivial for me at the time, is that my unhappiness has nothing to do with the external. It's all about the internal. I knew very little about psychology, but I knew that psychology studies the internal. And that's when I actually changed my concentration, my major, from computer science to psychology and philosophy, and haven't looked back since. And today I still love computer science, but professionally have not looked back.
Wonderful. Oh, and by the way, Tim here was a student athlete as well, right? Because you played ice hockey. Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
So, I mean, maybe I'll take that opportunity to jump in. So I got to Harvard in 2004. I knew I wanted to take psychology. I was, thinking I was psychology or economics, and my dad was actually a police officer in New York when I was little. He retired in 91, which just means he got his pension, but he was a detective and then actually graduated from the FBI Academy in Quantico. And so he would always talk to me about, kind of criminal psychology and maybe the abnormal. And I was always fascinated by that. And so I started taking my psychology courses, had that be my major. I kind of could connect with him on some of the stuff that I was learning, which was fun. But I realized very quickly I was more drawn to what's normal. Like, why do people behave that we consider normal? What's driving their behavior? And so that's really where I kind of focused my attention on some of the courses and where I really, learned a lot and had some passion. So, but when I was at Harvard, I played a little ice hockey, did a little mix of some varsity practices and JV games and that stuff, and I had a blast doing it. So I had a great experience.
Thank you, Adriana.
For me, I am the first in my family to graduate from college, and my parents are both immigrants. And I got to Harvard kind of surprised that I was there in the first place and feeling a lot of like wonder, but also the kind of responsibility on my shoulders of needing to do something kind of big and exciting with this opportunity. And I really credit my parents for walking me back from that external to say, no, Adriana, take classes that interest you. You'll find something you like. And that was, I mean, looking back, God, what a blessing. And for me, I sat in a social psychology class. I was kind of thinking about psychology. I am a very extroverted people person. I'm not shocked. I was kind of walking in that direction. But it was the social psych classes that really interested me in terms of how humans interact with others, talking to what you said, Tal, about how the external is so much more important than people give it credit for. All the kind of work in organizational psych really, piqued my interest. But I often feel like the work that you kind of brought to the table via positive was probably the most compelling for me for the long term because of what you already said, Tim. It was around the higher functioning, the exciting, the moving forward, the wisdom, even, which is why I remember that you were philosophy too, Tal, and I remember that being an interest of mine as well, where psychology kind of meets philosophy is a really interesting interest of mine as well.
Thank you. So looking back many years, Tal, could you share with us, what was the genesis of your course at Harvard? Was it something that they wanted? Was it something students, was it hard to make happen? How did it happen?
Yeah, so there's as in most stories, there's some element of luck, some element of design, or at least we tell ourselves that there are some elements of design. I was a student of the late Professor Philip Stone. And Phil Stone, back in 1998, became one of the founders of the field of positive psychology, alongside people like Marty Seligman and Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi and Barbara Fredrickson from UNC and others. And he wanted to teach a class on positive psychology. And it was, I think, the second or third class in the world in the field, and asked me whether I wanted to be the TA, which of course I did. And I was his teaching assistant for 6 years. And he was a real mentor to me. Mentor in many ways. I think, for example, it's more than symbolic that our first child, David, was born in 2004, took his first steps in Phil Stone's home in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He was so, a mentor to me. He was my son's godfather. And then in 2000, a year before that, in 2003, he said to me, look, I'm thinking of retiring. I was just getting my PhD the following year. He said, do you want to take over the class and teach positive psychology? And it took me about 3 nanoseconds at most to say yes, thank you, please. And I took over the class. Now, he taught it as a seminar, because he, conversation, and he was, he liked those, close, intimate conversations with students. And he said, why don't you try and teach it as a lecture course, because there's real demand for it. And little did we know, and so I started teaching it, and However, at the same time, I taught a class on leadership because a lot of my research revolves around leadership. And I remember the first year when I taught, so I went out with a friend just before the class who was a leader in the local Boston community. And he said to me, so Tal, which classes are you teaching this year? And I said, I'm teaching positive psychology and the psychology of leadership. And he said to me, oh, so you're teaching one class on happiness and one class on unhappiness. And so the following year, I actually put together a class, which I've been teaching since, mostly in organization, called Positive Leadership, to bring the two worlds together.
And Adriana, I think that you took, or did both of you take both classes? And I know, Adriana, you said that the leadership one really impacted you. Can you share a little bit about how it has, or how it did?
I use it like every day, honestly, constantly. But even when I was in these kind of high pressure situations at the State Department, I actually remember your week where we talked about a crucible, and like, I was paying attention and just thinking through, the important, and you don't have control over all of this. Obviously, we know this too, but the kind of, even the intention of taking something difficult and trying to see, well, okay, what can I learn from this? What can I, bring forward from this? I mean, I cannot tell you how many times I would get a phone call or an email that made my heart fall kind of through my body, through the floor. And I went, okay, what are we going to do about this?
Adriana, this is actually just this morning I was speaking with the client, and this idea came up where we often hear growing up the sentence, or at least I heard it often, things happen for the best.
Oh, yeah.
And I must say, from a young age, I never fully connected to that, because what do you mean things happen for the COVID happened for the best? People
exactly,
died.
right.
There's a downturn in the economy, people are losing their jobs. I mean, what do you mean things happen for the best? But what I do connect to, and that's related, Adriana, to the work on crucibles, the work of Warren Bennis and others, is that while things don't necessarily happen for the best, we can choose to make the best of things that happen.
There we go.
So, the former is passive optimism.
Exactly.
And to my mind, detached. The latter is active optimism. We can actually do something about it. And the question, of course, is what? And what leaders do is they find a path out of that hardship and difficulty and towards growth when possible. Not always possible, but when possible.
Exactly.
Tim, what about you? What are your memories of Tal's class?
Well,
I know it's a long time ago, and then maybe how you use it in your day-to-day work.
Well, I think so, short term and a little bit longer term, but I want to touch on what we were just talking about, leadership too. So short term, I think it was the first time after getting into Harvard where this idea that you were hammering home of this like permission to be human really kind of stuck with me, which was, it's okay if you feel a little overwhelmed. It's okay if you don't have it all together. And for so long, I mean, the students that were, I think it resonated so well at Harvard because everybody, one mistake, one bad test, you screw up the SAT, like everything that you've been working for could just, be gone. So people felt like they, were holding on to, I need to be perfect, this idea of perfection. And so in the short term, it was this permission to be human. You're not perfect. Understand you're not perfect. You can have flaws. And that was followed up by this idea of work. It was always, I have to do this work. I have to do this test. I have to do this study. I have to do this. Well, for me, then it transitioned to, I have the privilege to do this work, to read this, to sit in this class. I have the privilege to, and that from I got to, I want to. Right. And that was always important to me, just as I start thinking about even the work I do now, which is I get to and I want to do this work. But then longer term, I had a lot of buddies that went into investment banking and consulting and did all the work. And what I did out of college was I started a hockey training company in Raleigh, North Carolina for youth hockey players. There was a period where I was like, that is not a worthy job of a Harvard graduate. And about the same time I was taking positive psychology. and thinking about what are my talents, what are my passions, where's the intersection. And it was right after the class where I started putting the business plan together with a partner of what am I going to do? This is what I want to do, where I want to be, and what I'm good at, and I can make an impact. And that was kind of the intersection that led me to start in 2008 this program that worked with young kids. And it wasn't about hockey, it was about building self-esteem, but that's another story. So anyway, that's
That
a little
Venn diagram, though, honestly, Tim, it came at such a perfect time, I think, because those of us that were probably taking your class were further along. We were either in our kind of third or fourth year. We were probably starting to think about career. That Venn diagram of like that meaning and the purpose, right? And like the mastery. And, you know, and another thing that stands out to me is that day where you put up the research, I don't remember who it was, on above a certain threshold. Income really doesn't have a say on happy. It was like somebody had lifted an elephant off of my chest. And it actually, Tim, just like you, I was looking around, and if any of my friends end up watching this, they'll remember this. I didn't go to on-campus interviewing. And of course, there was a moment where I was like, am I doing the wrong thing? Am I doing the wrong thing? Because the current, you know, swimming against that current is scary. But I knew I didn't want to do that stuff. And I almost feel like the positive psychology experience coming when it did at that point in my undergrad career allowed, you put it perfectly, allowed me to say, you know what, I'm my own individual. I'm going to chart my own path. And I ended up at a little like nonprofit consulting company that just worked with these like scrappy little organizations. And look, that's what I'm doing now. So I'm totally with you on the Venn diagram piece of it.
Tal, see what you've impacted, and Tal, because Tim talked about self-esteem. Wasn't your talk just a few days ago to our academy? It was on self-esteem, right?
Yeah. So
So it's all connected. Everything's connected.
It is all connected. And you know, one of the things that I talk about now, especially now in the context of a master's degree in happiness studies, which we just recently launched, is the spiral theory of knowledge. And the idea of the spiral theory of knowledge is that knowledge or understanding is not linear, but rather works. So understand something at this level, and then maybe a year later, understand the same thing, only at a higher level, and then a higher level and a higher level. So many of these ideas, I must say, you know, you're talking about them and, you know, how they met you then when you were, you know, early 20s, and how you're, you know, assimilating them perhaps today. I find that too. You know, so I always emphasize in class, it's not just you, the students, who are going through the journey. I'm going through the journey as well, because these are, you know, certain principles that I didn't invent. You know, I'm just, you know, a channel for these principles that come from, whether it's Aristotle or Barbara Fredrickson or Marty Seligman or Helen Keller. And who knows where they got it from? I mean, Aristotle, maybe he got it from Thales or from others. And these are ideas that, if we can understand them, you know, maybe when we're 7 years old, and then we can certainly understand them when we're 21, and we understand them at a different level when we're in our 30s or 50s or even later on in life. And because I resonate with what you're saying, I think about that Venn diagram a lot. You know, I look for the overlap, whether it's between, you know, purpose and pleasure, or between, you know, what are my talents, what are my strengths, and what gives me strength. In other words, what are my passions? And this overlap, you know, matters when I think about, do I teach? Do I write? Do I go into, you know, investment banking? Do I go into consulting? Do I become a lawyer? I mean, these are important questions at every stage in our life.
Yeah. And Adriana, you talked about the light bulb moment you had with Tal about the research on income. And a lot of what I took away from Tal, and I talk about a lot when I do workshops, is the happiness advantage, which I believe your teaching fellow, Sean Acor, that he was your teaching fellow. I think, Adriana, you had him. So that concept is so simple, but it's so deep. And it's something that I'm surprised in front of my audience, a lot of people don't realize that, that it's happiness that brings success, not the other way around. Because most people think just when I achieve X, then I will be happy. And Tim, I bet maybe early on when people are either at startups when they're younger or maybe founders, they might be focused a lot on the exit, and then all these wonderful things will happen. Can you share a little bit about your experiences with founders, with all these startups, about the happiness advantage, the happiness journey? Can you share with us what you've
Yeah.
experienced as both an
Yeah.
investor and seeing the and you've been a founder? Maybe tell us a
Yeah.
little bit as an investor.
Sure. The big, so we're seeing thousands of opportunities to invest every year, and we're maybe investing in 4 or 5 companies. So one of the big things, we don't look at it that there's a right answer, but we look at it, when I ask this question, as something that we want to align our goals with, which is the why, why are you starting this company? What is your goal? There are people that, after asking and digging a little bit, they need CEO on a business card. And that's not a good reason to be starting a company. There are people that are only focused on the monetary exit at the end of the road. And if you look at the statistics, odds are that's not going to happen. And so when they realize that there's a change, how are they going to react? And so we ask a lot about the why. What's the North Star? What do you want to get out of this? And it's not only what they say in response, but how they respond. You kind of get a feeling for, is this really what they're getting, the reason they're getting into this business and going to go through this, crazy few maybe decade, who knows, on what they're working on. But I wanted to touch on just something real quick about the leadership aspect, which was, all these things happen. I've invested in companies that have gone through pandemics, that have gone through, funding droughts where there's no way they can raise more capital. And how are they going to lead their teams, their organizations through that journey? What is a positive outcome is constantly changing. Week to week in startup world, it is, what are we trying to get? What's a good outcome today? Not when you raised capital 5 years ago. And so I just thought, as you were talking about that, as we were kind of shifting through, and we lived in a tumultuous world the last, 5 or 6 years, that's kind of how we help guide them through, is what's a positive outcome today and what actions can we take to help achieve it. So just thought.
It reminds me, Tim, of the research by Teresa Amabile. And this is more recent research. So I didn't talk about it when you were in the class, but she has a book out called The Progress Principle. And what she talks about is how important it is for organizations and for individuals within organizations to appreciate the progress that they made. In other words, the positive, and to be conscious, aware of it on a day-to-day basis. So not just, okay, IPO, amazing, but along the way, and that significantly increases the likelihood that you will get to that IPO, or that you will do well, that you'll have energy over the years. And one of the sound bites that I repeat over and over again has to do with appreciation, because the word appreciate has 2 meanings. Appreciate, say thank you for something, and appreciate also grow in value. And the idea is that when you appreciate the good appreciates.
Mm-hmm.
So when you focus on the positive, you'll actually have more of it over time.
So one of the girls who I was roommates with at the time, who since has become a clinical psychologist, by the way, there's a big group of us that are still friends from school. There's 12 girls. We're all still the power of a WhatsApp chain that's been going for probably 10 years straight now. She had the amazing idea of starting a gratitude specific chain. And one of the coolest things about it is that even if you don't have the energy that day to write down a couple of gratitudes, one of 12 usually will. So not only are you kind of taking a minute to appreciate, maybe your own life, the way the water reflected under something, the way something tastes to say, but you're also getting it from your closest friends. And she specifically talked about how that was something that we kind of saw for the first time with you. And obviously has been, since then has been validated a million times. But aside from that, something that's very interesting in what you said, Tim, what you just confirmed, Tal, is the idea that if you're doing something that you are feeling great about, you're enjoying it, you're being kind to other people, you have extra capacity to take on more, you're the kind of person people want to work with. This is something that I felt like I had going into my first job before law school. During law school, even, I remember having the conversation around my friends who were living in a library and grinding themselves down. I was like, I stop and go to the movie. They were like, what? You're going to go to the movie? And I'm like, no. I'm going to take care of myself, and then I'm going to come back to this work. And I think the fact that I'm enjoying myself will mean that I will do better. And it has borne out. And I now do a lot of mentoring with, especially people graduating from law school who are afraid of not being lawyers. I'm like, it's okay. The water's okay over here. We're all right. And I think so much of it is, it's not the title, it's not the salary, it's the meaning that you derive from the work. It's the people you work with. It's the issues you work on. It's that, I hate this phrase, work-life balance. I'm actually going to say, how much life can you live while doing this job? Like these things, and I think it's hard when you're in your 20s, you're just graduating from these expensive degrees. It's scary to take that kind of jump. And I think what helped me most was the, right brain, left brain. Like I had the data. Like, no, it's real. It's real. I feel like this is good enough for me to be able to take this jump and say, I'm going to do this because I think it's a great team. It's enough to live on. Don't get me wrong. And there's privilege in being able to take, lower paying jobs, whatever, scholarship, etc. But there's also this, I think I'm going to love this. And I think loving it just adds to that, the appreciation for your double meaning, for your double definition.
Yeah, yeah. So I think there may be some people watching this who may not be that happy. They may be in situations, and if you look at the statistics nationally, the majority of people are not very happy with their work. And back to Tim, what you said about perfectionism, they're working a lot with something they don't like. That can be quite miserable. Tal, you you get calls from companies throughout the world. Can you share with us what are some of the problems that they seek your help out in, and what types of things you do to help them? Oh, let me.
So over the past, say, 4 or 5 years even, so pre-COVID, the number one reason why a company would call me is because of the rising stress levels. So they were extremely high, 2018, 2019, they skyrocketed, literally, through COVID and still today. And there's a lot of very important, meaningful and potentially life-changing work done in the area of stress. And basically, to my mind, the two most important takeaways are as follows. First, stress in and of itself is not a problem. You think about physiological stress. You go to the gym, you lift weights, you're stressing your muscles. So that's not a problem because that's how you grow stronger, healthier, better. The problems begin when we stress our muscles is when we don't have recovery. So when we lift weights and then more weights and more and more and more, that's when we actually get injured. And it's the same psychologically. Stress in and of itself is not a bad thing. We actually become more resilient, psychologically stronger, tougher when we endure stress. When we experience, what Tim and Adriana talked about, failure or hardships and difficulties. And we know that with children as well, it's not a bad thing when they struggle. That's how they grow stronger. The problem is when there is no recovery to complement this stress. So stress without recovery leads to breakdown. Stress with recovery leads to build up. And that's what organizations need to be cognizant of. And Tim, in your world, and also in your world, Adriana, and Grace, through your coaching, you face it all the time. So much burnout, so much breakdown, especially when you're in a startup, working around the clock. And that's fine working hard, as long as you also have some recovery alongside the lifting, the stress. So that's one very important element to think about, the recovery. I say, as a society, certainly in the developed and the developing world, not enough. The second is our perception of stress. So one of the students who later became a teaching assistant in the class, Aaliyah Crum, who's today a professor at Stanford.
She's at Stanford doing amazing work.
Amazing work. And what she shows is that our perception of stress is so important, because what she does is when she gets people to look at stress, look at the upside of stress, as potentially helpful because it focuses you, because it gets you stronger, because it helps to motivate at times. So just change in perception regarding stress can make a very big difference in terms of how it affects us. So more recovery and a somewhat more favorable perception of stress. This is not taking away from the fact that sometimes, stress, of course, can be harmful, but it's usually when it's not coupled with recovery, and usually when it's perceived as only, solely, fully negative.
Thank you. That reminds me of what Adriana said earlier about her change in the way she looks at things. So we're all parents. And it's interesting when you talk to parents and what they want for their children, inevitably, universally, everyone says, I just want my children to be happy. You talked a little bit about letting children fail because it teaches them something. So it's interesting that universally that's what all parents say, but interestingly, schools don't teach happiness. They teach arithmetic, they teach writing, they teach things that aren't bad, of course, but they don't teach happiness. And Tal, I see that you were instrumental in changing that because I think you said that there was worldwide, you were one of the first at Harvard to teach this. And today there's very few places that teach it. Yale copied Harvard and it is now teaching and very successfully with Laurie Santos. I'm really interested in your views as parents about for children. And then Tal, I know, and I haven't gotten it to you because I think it's one of the last lectures, but I will take it before I earn my diploma about happiness schools. I'm interested in as parents, and then since you were a trailblazer, Tal, in higher ed, what you would like to see on the higher ed side. And then I think I'm going to guess, based on the name of one of your final things about happiness schools, and I know you talk about it, I'm going to guess maybe it goes below higher ed, so because of we're all parents, what we want for our children. I'd love to hear, Tal, maybe would you mind starting about the your thoughts there? I know that was a lot of questions boiled and I'll put into one.
Yeah, so I think introducing a happiness curriculum or a science of well-being curriculum into schools, and I mean from K through 12, is so important. Especially today, so 50 years ago, we didn't really have a science of happiness. We had conjectures, we had very smart people writing and thinking about it, but it's only the last 50 years, really, with the work of Ed Dinner and later with positive psychology, that we have a science. Why isn't it introduced in schools alongside, the 3 R's, alongside geography and history and biology, which are very important, of course. But the science of happiness does so many other things beyond the fact that it helps us feel better or have better experiences. It also improves our performance at school and in the workplace. It also helps us become healthier. It also significantly reduces violence and bullying. So there are so many side effects, positive side effects, to increasing levels of well-being. Why aren't schools teaching it? Just as they're teaching the 3 R's, no less important, not instead of, in addition to. And of course, it's synergistic because they can reinforce each other. And then, I often ask in my classes when I talk to adults, I ask them, okay, so put your hand up if you've taken a math class in your life. Of course, everyone puts their hand up. Put your hand up if you've taken a history class. Everyone puts their hand up. Put your hand up if you've taken a parenting class. Nobody. Put your hand up if you've taken a relationship class. Nobody. Happiness, very few. Why? Are these things less important? And again, they work together because if we know how to parent better, and if we have happier families and relationships, we'll also do better in the workplace. And then, Adriana, we go back to your idea, which is, you bring more life to your family life and you bring more life to your work.
Right.
So
Tim, this sounds like a good investment opportunity.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm
My wheels are turning here.
yeah, actually, Tim, this is a pitch. I don't know if you
Okay,
There you
good.
go.
Yeah.
Which is the pitch all
Got
along.
a couple more lined up today.
This was
So
all a scheme for this.
Exactly. Yes, so I talk a lot about multitasking and how it's sometimes unhealthy, but sometimes
Yeah.
inevitable. We have to multitask. But I'm all for task multiplying.
Yes.
Taking one task and multiplying its impact. So this is a conversation between friends. It's also a pitch.
yeah,
Anyway.
Tim, this is a task multiplier.
Yes,
that's great.
exactly.
I was gonna. Oh, I'm sorry. Tal.
No, I'm
Yeah,
done for now.
I was just thinking of an analogy that I have as raising the kids. I'm also now back on the ice coaching my 6-year-old, and we had I think last weekend I had 86-year-olds on the ice and then I was trying to handle that. So it's been a pretty wild time.
Oh my God, you're
Yeah.
amazing.
Well, hold on. I didn't say it went well. No, it was fun. But the interesting thing with when I think of our kids and how to make them happy, what I've realized, and this is just a little hockey analogy, it's just giving them a wide open net and letting them slap the puck in. Sure, that'll make them happy one time, and then they get a little bit bored with it. But me going and taking the puck and not letting them ever touch it isn't going to make them happy either. They have no chance of success. And it's this constant balance that we're trying to run between it's too hard, it's too easy. And I see that a lot of parents often err on the side of the easy because it's immediate satisfaction, but it's not long-term happiness and creating this tension that folks are growing. So it's one of these things where I make everything really close. It's hard, but when they get it, they're super excited. Whether it's a new drill that we're doing or they're playing against the coaches, they'll win 5-4, but it was a tight game. And so it's this constant, I guess, push and pull on, making kids too happy, but making sure that they earn what they achieve. And I think that is where you find growth. And that's how my wife and I are trying to raise 2 boys that, and make them happy, but make them grow.
Yeah, I love that analogy. And I don't know if you remember from way back when you took the class, when I introduced the research by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi.
I still am so proud that I know how to say that name, and that is completely because of you.
Well, I don't know if you remember this, Adriana, or if it was your class. I actually gave extra credit for spelling his name correctly. Yeah. So his work is really amazing. And Tim, he talks, to what you were talking about. So challenge them, but don't make it impossible. Make it hard, but not too hard. And again, you go to the gym. You want to push yourself. You don't want resistance to be on 0. Too easy, you won't get stronger. At the same time, you don't want it to be too hard. You'll get injured or won't be able to do it at all. You want to find that golden mean, to use Aristotle's terminology. You want to find that balance between difficulty, challenge, and ease.
Thank you. This has been such a delightful conversation. I could go on, but we're probably looking to wrap up now. Is there anything that I didn't ask, perhaps, that you'd like to share with our audience before we sign off?
Well, I think we'll let
376 things that I would like to ask, the 3 of you. But other than that, I'm done. Thank you.
I was just thinking that as I think back on the course and kind of what we learned, it's important that you're meeting these concepts where people are in their life and in their journey. By that, what I mean is what we thought was a big deal in college, a lot of times now in our professional careers, we wouldn't view as that big of a deal, but that doesn't make it any less real for what someone's going through when they're in college or when they're in business school or when they're in the professional world or wherever, or when they're a child. Right. What's a real issue and a challenge and a problem is a real issue and challenge and problem to that person. And I always think that from someone's perspective as I'm going and applying these things. And when I was thinking back on the course, how I was thinking about positive psychology then at a different stage of my life and now. So that's the only thing I wanted to add.
Thank you, Tim. And I think this is exactly what, the spiral theory of knowledge.
Yeah.
is all about. Where does it meet us? And and when when you're a parent to teenagers, things change. When you're an empty nester, things change. There are always different challenges, and yet there are certain principles,
Yeah.
that can help us navigate those seas. And you talked earlier, Tim, about the North Star. It's about having a compass rather than a map.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm so thrilled that we were able to all get together and talk about Tal's teaching and impact and positive psychology and happiness on our lives for the last many years. And I'm sure that our viewers will learn bits of wisdom as well. And I hope that they can apply to their lives, and I hope to hear from them. So thank you all very much.
Great. Thanks, Grace.
Thank you,
Thank,
Grace.
thank you, Grace.